At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's Aram. Let's begin. The cosmos is a terrible conversationalist. Mostly it just mutters about entropy and the inevitable heat death of everything, which gets old fast. On the rare occasions it raises its voice, it's usually to announce that something large, vast, and indifferent is about to turn you into a rapidly expanding cloud of vaporized disappointment. Right now, it was screaming bloody murder in Sid Rivas's ear. He was magnetically clamped to the hull of a defunct Kithiri research vessel, the Celestine Dream, which tumbled through the void in a slow funeral waltz. A kilometer-long fragment of a Concordat dreadnought, a dragon's spine of scorched alloy and shattered limbs, drifted past close enough to make his suit's proximity sensors throw a digital tantrum. Sid ignored them. Tantrums were the background noise of his profession. Nearby, tethered to the same derelict, Gunnar fired a pair of grapnels. The heavy claws bit into the hull with a percussive, arresting a section of the ship's spin with a shudder that vibrated up through the soles of Sid's boots. With a calmness that was probably insulting to the universe itself, Sid guided the sizzling tip of his thermal lance across the vessel's skin. The tool, a temperamental piece of junk he'd liberated from a wrecked ore hauler, sputtered and coughed like a dying smoker. He gave it a solid whack against the hull. "I've told you before," Sid muttered into his comm, his own breathing a placid counterpoint to the electronic shrieking. "You only get to whine if you're paying rent." "Copy, Sid," a voice rumbled back, a sound like gravel being poured into a cement mixer. Gunnar's transmissions were exercises in brevity. "Clear." While Sid resumed his work, Gunnar moved with the silent, brutal grace of a continental plate. A piece of shrapnel the size of a family sedan came spinning out of the debris field, aimed squarely at Sid's exposed back. Gunnar didn't shout a warning. He simply fired another grapnel. The cable unspooled, the claw seized the projectile, and with a grunt that was pure physical commentary on the laws of inertia, he redirected its path. The metal shard shot past, missing Sid by a few meters, and receded back into the glittering, silent pandemonium of the Tangle. The Tangle was the ghost of the Battle of the Veil Nebula, a scrapyard larger than most solar systems, ensnared in the fractured gravitational tides of a shattered moon. It was a place where physics had a nervous breakdown and took everyone else down with it. Official Concordat recovery operations had packed up and left weeks ago, declaring the entire sector a total loss. Sid considered that a glowing business recommendation. The Concordat's write-off was his operating budget. A high-frequency scream vibrated up the lance's handle and through the gauntlets as it finally burned through the last layer of composite armor. A perfect circle of metal glowed a furious cherry red, then sagged and dripped away into the vacuum. He kicked the plug free. The darkness inside the ship was a physical presence, a blot of absolute nothing that drank the faint light from his helmet. The angry scream of the lance died, and the silence that rushed in was heavier than any sound. The only noise left was the gentle hiss of his life support and the slow, plodding drumbeat of his own heart. Time to clock in. Inside, the Celestine Dream was a zero-G mausoleum. The dead drifted in a slow, spectral ballet with shattered data slates and delicate instruments that still pulsed with faint, apologetic light. The air, what little remained, was a frozen razor in his suit's recyclers. Illumination came from the ghostly, intermittent flashes of emergency strips that hadn't quite accepted their own demise. The place was a labyrinth of frozen nightmares. But to Sid, it was just another day at the office. He moved with the unnerving grace of a man who'd spent more of his life falling than standing. His motions were clear-cut, each small burst from his maneuvering jets a calculated nudge through the debris. He was hunting a sound, a faint, rhythmic ping that sliced through the static like a needle. A Kithiri distress beacon, the lonely, weeping heartbeat of a digital ghost. The signal led him to the ship's main data core. The chamber was a catastrophe. Towering racks of silver-blue alloy and what looked like spun sugar had toppled like dominoes, creating a jagged, impassable forest of wreckage. And there, at the epicenter of the destruction, he found the source. A lone Kithiri engineer, her leg pinned beneath a colossal server rack that had to weigh 10 tons in atmosphere. Her exosuit was a high-tech wonder, a seamless garment of integrated systems and soft blue lights. But those lights were failing, one by one, like dying fireflies. The panic coming off her was so thick he could smell it through 2 layers of helmet. He landed beside her with the soft clank of his mag boots. Her helmet turned, the faceplate revealing wide, terrified eyes. My leg, she transmitted, her voice a thin, digital tremble.
The emergency release requires a systems handshake with the main conduit, but the power is gone.
A calm, synthesized female voice from her suit's external speaker added in a tone of polite condescension.
Stating the obvious is a suboptimal use of dwindling energy reserves.
Sid assessed the situation in the 3 seconds it took her to speak. The rack was too massive. Even in 0G, its inertia would make it a multi-ton battering ram. Gunner was too far away, still playing shepherd to their ride, the misfit. He could try cutting the rack, but the heat could flash cook her trapped limb. He looked at the dying lights on her suit, the frost beginning to bloom across her faceplate from the inside. We don't have time for a handshake, Sid grunted, his voice a gravelly counterpoint to her panicked static. He unslung his thermal lance. The Kithiri, Naya, began protesting, her words a frantic cascade of technical specifications and warnings about compromising the suit's integrity. Her suit's AI chimed in.
I concur. The proposed action carries a 98.4% probability of catastrophic structural failure, limb loss, and a voided warranty.
Sid tuned both of them out. He wasn't a surgeon. He was a crowbar. He aimed the lance not at the rack, but at the articulated joint of her exosuit's leg, just below the knee. He fired. A pained cry cut through the comms. The composite alloy of her suit slagged, boiled, and then severed. With a final convulsive flicker, the last of her suit's primary blue lights winked out, replaced by a single angry red emergency blinker. The AI's voice, now utterly flat and devoid of its earlier smugness, echoed in his helmet.
Auxiliary power failing. Life support compromised. Estimated function 9 minutes 48 seconds. I trust you are satisfied.
Now the clock was ticking in earnest. He holstered the lance and pulled a thick, ugly bundle from his utility belt. It was a specialized harness he called the Piggybacker, a chaotic mess of reinforced nylon straps, redundant buckles, and heavy magnetic clamps. A custom modification. His hands moved with focused intensity, double-checking the primary load-bearing carabiner, his thumb tracing its locking gate with the certainty of long practice. He secured her torso tightly to his back, her limp form a dead weight. Her helmet clacked against his, just over his shoulder. He cinched the straps until they were a single, awkward unit. "Hold on, and try not to squirm," he ordered. He didn't wait for a reply. He engaged his thrusters, pushing off from the wreck. The new mass distribution immediately tried to send them into a wild, uncontrolled spin. He compensated instinctively, firing short bursts from his wrist and boot jets, a complex, 3-dimensional dance he'd perfected over 1,000 dangerous jobs. He wasn't just flying anymore, he was flying for 2. He was a one-man 0G ambulance, and his patient was actively trying to kill them both just by existing. The trip back was a masterclass in controlled insanity. Sid boosted through the debris field, Naya's weight a familiar, terrifying burden. Every piece of shrapnel was a bullet. Every tumbling chunk of superstructure was a mountain trying to fall on them. He used the skeletal frame of a dead Gathakian siegebreaker as cover, weaving through its broken ribs to evade the still-active point defense turrets. The cannons, their targeting software driven mad by the gravitational anomalies, spat green plasma at phantom signals and dust motes. He saw their ship, the Misfit, and felt a surge of relief that was as unprofessional as it was welcome. She wasn't pretty, an ex-asteroid hauler. Her hull was a Frankenstein's monster of mismatched plates salvaged from a dozen different jobs, each patch a scar with a story. She was ugly, cantankerous, and utterly, beautifully reliable. He landed with a solid clank on the hull, the mag boots finding their purchase. The outer airlock door hissed open before he even reached it. Gunnar was there, his massive frame filling the doorway. He reached out and effortlessly helped Sid guide Naya's inert form inside, his movements gentle for a man his size. Behind him, Courtney Jitter Peters was a blur of motion, her hands already a frenzy of activity across a control panel.
"Pressure's good. Get her in. I've got the men bay prepped and the heaters cranked to blast furnace,"
she chirped, her voice a rapid-fire burst of cheerful, caffeine-fueled energy. They moved the shivering Kithiri into the cramped medbay. It was less a medical facility and more a glorified closet with a biobed and a lot of Jitter's custom modifications, which mostly involved exposed wiring and a faint smell of burnt toast. As they got Nia settled, a shadow fell over the doorway. Daiki of the Valkoran Empire stood there, his hulking frame nearly touching the ceiling. They'd pulled him out of the guts of a Valkoran frigate the week before. His arm was in a makeshift splint fashioned from a cargo strap and a metal strut, but his warrior's eyes, dark and sharp, missed nothing. He watched them with a look of profound, stoic confusion. He was a creature of rigid military doctrine and honor codes, and the chaotic, jury-rigged operation of the Misfits seemed to offend him on a deep, spiritual level. Jitter was struggling, swearing colorfully under her breath.
"Come on, you pretentious piece of Kithiri junk! Talk to me!"
She was trying to interface the Misfits' human-built medical scanner with Nia's alien biology. The two systems were communicating with all the grace of a brick thrown through a stained glass window. Nia, her breathing now a little steadier in the warmth, offered a weak suggestion through the medbay speaker.
"Diagnostic port. It uses a cascading encryption key. You have to bypass the tertiary buffer and—"
Jitter's eyes lit up with the fire of 1,000 suns.
"Oh, you magnificent nerd!"
She grabbed a data cable, a soldering iron that looked like it had been used to fight off a wild animal, and a spare console screen. In 90 seconds of furious, sparking work, her hands a blur, creating a tangle of wires and pure willpower that looked like a nest built by a lightning storm, she spliced together a crude but functional diagnostic interface. Data scrolled across the screen. Nia stared, her jaw slack with a mixture of awe and abject horror. It was Daiki who finally broke the silence, his deep voice resonating through the small room. "I have been monitoring the unsecured channels. The scavengers, the survivors, they speak of phantoms, ghosts who walk through the dead ships and carry the dying from their tombs." He looked directly at Sid, his gaze intense. "They call them Void Walkers." Nia's eyes widened, her gaze shifting from Jitter's chaotic masterpiece of engineering to Sid's rugged, scarred EVA suit hanging by the airlock. A slow, dawning realization spread across her face.
"What you did?"
she whispered.
"Our suits, Kithiri suits, they're designed for total integration. They interface with our ships, piloted by the vessel's navigation AI in an emergency. We don't
fly them. Not manually. Not like that. It's considered barbaric.
Daiki grunted in agreement, a sound like a rock fall. Valkoran combat armor is the same, but for different reasons. It is too massive. Its thrusters are for orbital assault, not navigating a wreck. To strap another being to your back, the mass imbalance would be uncontrollable. The system would lock the pilot out to prevent a fatal spin. It is a violation of at least 14 operational safety protocols. He looked at Sid's suit again. Your gear is fully manual. Yeah, we call it reliable, Sid corrected him, pulling off his helmet.
We rely on our systems to define the limits of the possible.
Nia shook her head, a gesture of pure astonishment.
I never imagined just ignoring them. I never thought anyone could.
A heavy silence settled in the room, thick with the weight of that revelation. Humanity, the fragile, soft-skinned newcomers from a high-gravity death world relegated to the galaxy's dirty jobs. Too breakable for the front lines, they'd said. And here, in the deadliest place in the known galaxy, that perceived weakness had become their most unbelievable strength. Daiki's expression darkened. This reputation is a liability. The scrap lords who infest the Tangle are led by a disgraced warlord, Vikram. He was exiled from the Empire for cowardice. He abandoned his command during the siege of Kresh, left his entire cohort to die to save his own skin. He met Sid's eyes. A man like that, who lives by a creed of self-preservation at all costs, will be disgusted by tales of selfless rescue. He won't just see you as competition. He'll see you as an ideological insult. He will want to extinguish the legend. As if on cue, the new diagnostic rig beeped. Nia, her strength slowly returning, had been working.
I found a gap,
she whispered, her voice still weak but now laced with steel.
A microsecond window in the pirate's jamming field. I sent a signal, a coded, long-range Concordat distress call.
She looked up at them, her alien face grim.
It will take a few weeks for patrol to respond, if they can even penetrate this deep. But I had to try.
The message was sent. The die was cast. In the silence of the med bay, Sid could already hear the wolves beginning to circle. Nia's technical knowledge was a skeleton key to the Tangle's most dangerous secrets. Once she was on her feet, or rather, once Jitter had jury-rigged a surprisingly effective prosthetic leg from a cargo drone's hydraulic strut and a coffee maker's heating element, she became the fourth member of their chaotic little crew. She confirmed the location of a crippled Valkoran battlecruiser, the Gorgon's Tooth. Rumor said the Singularity Core was still intact. A prize like that could set them up for life, buy them a whole new ship, maybe even a small moon somewhere quiet where no one screamed about physics. The catch? It was deep in the most treacherous, contested part of the Tangle, right in the heart of Scrap Lord territory.
A Valkoran Singularity Core?
Jitter was vibrating with excitement.
Do you know what I could do with that? I could turn the Misfits air scrubber into a weapon of mass destruction. Or, upgrade the engines. Either way.
Gunner, who was meticulously cleaning his magnetic rivet gun, just grunted. It could have meant anything from, sounds dangerous, to, I would also like a tactical air scrubber. Sid leaned over the holographic map, his face a mask of weary pragmatism. The Gorgon's Tooth's location was too perfect, the rumors too loud. This smells like bait. It is a trap, Daiki stated flatly, his arms crossed over his massive chest. Vikram is luring you in. Standard ambush tactics, outlined in the Valkoran Field Manual, Volume 3, Chapter 9. Sid looked up from the map, and a slow, grim smile spread across his face. "Good," he said. "Let's not disappoint him." The potential reward was too great. Besides, Sid Rivas had never been one to back down from a fight, especially one someone else was stupid enough to start. They approached the Gorgon's Tooth with the caution of a bomb disposal team working on a hangover. The battlecruiser was a silent, jagged beast, half a kilometer long, wreathed in a frozen cloud of its own vented atmosphere. The Misfit crept closer, Jitter's custom sensor suite sniffing for ambushes.
"Hull's cold. Reactor's dead,"
she reported, her fingers dancing across her console.
"I'm picking up some faint power signatures, probably emergency life support on a closed loop, but no active weapons, no drive signatures. Either it's legit, or they're very, very good at playing dead."
"Vikram is a coward, not an amateur," Dai Ki rumbled from the co-pilot's seat. "He is good." Sid's hands were steady on the controls. "Take us in slow, Jitter. Keep those sensors on a hair trigger." They were 2 kilometers from the wreck, but the universe decided to get loud again.
"Contact! Multiple contacts! Decloaking!"
Jitter yelled, her voice suddenly sharp with alarm. Proximity alerts shrieked through the cockpit. 3 ships, brutal-looking scaver vessels painted in the dull red and rust of the scrap lords, materialized from the void around them. They had been hiding in the Gorgon's Tooth's sensor shadow, a classic pirate ambush. Plasma fire, brilliant green bolts of incandescent rage hammered the Misfit. The little hauler shuddered violently.
"Shields at 40%! Flaring on the port side! We've got a hull breach on deck 3!"
Jitter's status reports were a staccato litany of disaster. Sid threw the ship into a hard evasion, the artificial gravity groaning in protest. He skimmed the surface of a massive, rotating chunk of debris, using it as momentary cover.
"Gunner, we've got boarders!"
The pirates weren't waiting for a clean docking. They launched themselves across the void, their mag-clamp armor locking onto the Misfit's hull like angry ticks. A brutal, zero-G firefight broke out on their doorstep. Sid saw the engagement on a side mirror. Gunner was already there. He'd opened a breached outer airlock on Deck 3, creating a deadly choke point. In his hands was the magnetic rivet gun, a tool designed for emergency hull patching he'd nicknamed the Persuader. It fired fist-sized metal slugs at high velocity. In Gunner's hands, the Persuader was a devastating shotgun. A pirate landed on the hull, raising a plasma rifle. Thwump! A rivet hit him square in the chest, punching through his armor and sending him spinning off into the darkness. A silent, tumbling corpse. Another tried to flank the airlock. Thwump! Gone. Gunner was a silent, immovable wall of death, standing in the breach, protecting his home. Sid, meanwhile, was performing miracles. He danced the crippled Misfit through a ballet of death, using asteroids, wreckage, and the colossal hulk of the Gorgon's Tooth itself as cover. Plasma bolts seared past the cockpit view screen.
"Main drive is hit!"
Jitter screamed over a fresh explosion that rocked the ship.
"Plasma leak! We're venting fuel! I can't hold it!"
"You don't have to," Sid grunted, his eyes locked on a massive, dark shape looming ahead. It was a fragment of the shattered moon, a continent-sized piece of rock riddled with canyons and caverns from the cataclysm. "Just get me there." With one final desperate burn, he pushed the dying ship into a deep cavern within the moon fragment, a place where scans were useless and light had never touched. They escaped, but as the sound of weapons fire faded, replaced by the hiss of failing systems and the groaning of stressed steel, they were left with a terrible truth. The Misfit was crippled. They were stranded, hiding in the shadow of a giant's corpse, with a pack of wolves hunting them. In the quiet darkness of the cockpit, staring at the damage reports that painted a picture of total system failure, Sid found his hand unconsciously checking the straps of his pilot's chair, tightening them. A ghost of a memory, of a strap that had failed, flickered behind his eyes. He was alive, His crew was alive. For now, that was enough. But for the first time in a long time, Sid Rivas had no idea what to do next. Morale hit rock bottom and started digging. The Misfits' main drive wasn't just damaged, it was a molten tumor of slagged conduits and shattered injectors. They were running on emergency power, which amounted to a few batteries and Jitter's boundless, frantic optimism.
Can we route the secondary plasma flow from the life support through the navigational array?
She muttered, more to herself than anyone else, her face illuminated by the green glow of a diagnostic screen.
It might give us enough juice to keep the heaters from failing completely. We'll have to breathe shallow, though.
Excellent, Sid said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. We'll suffocate in comfort. Nia was trying to help, her Kithiri mind processing the ship's schematics at a speed that made Jitter look sedate. Daiki was silent, a brooding mountain of Valkoran pride, staring out the view screen at the cavern's impenetrable darkness. He was a warrior without a weapon, a commander without a ship. It was Jitter's pet project that saved them, a custom-built deep-wave sensor array she'd cobbled together from the remains of 3 different alien sensor systems. She called it the Ghost Hunter, designed specifically to listen for faint, encrypted signals that conventional arrays would dismiss as background radiation. As she deliberately scanned for any sign of the Scraplord patrols, a flicker of something new appeared on her screen. A tiny, repeating signature. Faint, rhythmic, buried under layers of what looked like Valkoran military encryption. The signal originated from deeper within the moon fragment.
Hey, what's this?
She mumbled, leaning closer.
It's a deep system diagnostic loop. Low power, but persistent.
Daiki, roused from his stoicism, moved to look at her screen. His eyes, accustomed to Valkoran readouts, scanned the energy profile. He went rigid, his breath hitched. It cannot be, he whispered, his voice thick with a disbelief so profound it was almost reverence. Can't be what? Sid asked, pushing himself out of his chair. Daiki pointed a thick finger at the cascading lines of data. That energy profile. That encryption handshake, it is unique. I would know it anywhere. His eyes widened. It is the hand of judgment, my fleet's flagship. It must have crashed into the moon during the battle. Hope. The feeling was a dangerous, unfamiliar thing in the cold, dark cavern, but it was all they had left. Driven by a mixture of Daiki's desperate insistence and the fact that they had no other options, they went EVA. The Misfit was their base, but their destination lay deeper in the rock. They traversed the silent zero-G caverns for hours, their helmet lights cutting lonely paths through the absolute black. They found it embedded in the heart of the moon fragment, a metal giant sleeping in a bed of stone. The Hand of Judgment was a tomb on an epic scale. The crash had torn a monstrous canyon through the rock, and the dreadnought was wedged within it. Its forward third crumpled and obliterated, but its aft sections, where the engineering and reactor were housed, looked miraculously intact. Boarding the ship was like entering a cathedral of the dead. Its corridors were vast enough to drive a ground truck through, scarred by plasma fire and explosive decompression, but structurally sound. The silence was absolute, a heavy, oppressive blanket that swallowed the sound of their breathing. They reached the main bridge. The room was a scene of utter devastation. The command crew were still at their posts, skeletal figures in the remains of their uniforms, frozen in their final moments of defiance. A place of honor, Daiki called it. A place of ghosts, Sid thought. But Daiki led them past the carnage to a meter-thick blast door at the back of the bridge. It was sealed tight. Auxiliary command, he explained. and primary engineering access, shielded against direct bridge compromise. Gunnar didn't need to be asked. He produced a hydraulic winch from his pack, braced his mag boots, and with a series of deep, guttural grunts, manually cranked the massive door open. It groaned in protest, the sound echoing through the dead ship like the cry of a dying leviathan. The air inside was stale but breathable. It was dark but untouched, a ghost of a ghost ship. Jitter stepped into the center of the dark engineering hub, her flashlight beam dancing across rows of pristine consoles and dark, silent screens. A slow, manic grin spread across her face, a look of manic, mad scientist joy.
"Oh, you beautiful monster,"
she whispered. Then she looked at the others, her eyes gleaming.
"We can turn it on."
Daiki immediately began listing the impossibilities. It requires a command crew of at least 50. The ignition sequence needs biometric authorization from a ranking officer, and the reactor. A cold start on a core this size requires an external power source equivalent to a small star. Jitter's grin widened.
"We have a ranking Valkoran officer,"
she said, jabbing a thumb at Daiki.
"We have a Kit Theory engineering prodigy who can process data faster than a standard ship's computer."
She pointed at Nia.
"We have the galaxy's best human crowbar."
She nodded at Gunnar.
"And the galaxy's most stubborn pilot."
A nod to Sid.
"And as for the jump starter,"
she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper,
"I'm going to turn the misfit into one."
The plan wasn't just insane, it was a flagrant violation of about 1,000 laws of physics and common sense. It involved a high-risk EVA to run their battered hauler's primary power conduits across the void, physically splice them into the Dreadnought's emergency ignition port, and dump every last watt of the Misfit's power into the dead ship's heart. It was like trying to jumpstart a mountain with a watch battery. While Sid floated outside, his rifle at the ready, watching for any sign of Scraplord patrols, the rest of the team worked with a desperate, synchronized fury. Jitter, tethered and moving with the speed of a hummingbird, worked the connection, her plasma welder sparking brightly. Gunnar acted as her anchor, his mag boots clamped to the Dreadnought's hull, his immense strength the only thing holding the thick, energized power cable steady as it bucked and writhed like a living thing. Inside, Daiki and Nia were a flurry of activity. Daiki stood before the main command console, initiating the ship's emergency last stand protocol, a skeleton crew automation designed for a doomsday scenario. Nia was jacked into a secondary console, her mind a living co-processor, shunting and rerouting the deluge of data that would have instantly overwhelmed any single operator.
"Connection is almost ready,"
Jitter's voice crackled over the comm.
"This is going to be one hell of a feedback loop. The Misfit is going to be toast after this, Sid. No coming back."
Daiki looked up from his console, his face grim. "By all Valkoran law and logic, this is suicide," he stated flatly. Gunnar's voice, a rare and precious thing, crackled over the comm. "You sure about this, Sid?" Sid watched the mouth of the cavern, the cold expanse of the tangle beyond. He thought of Vikram hunting them. He thought of his crew, his cobbled-together family. "Got a better idea?" he replied, his voice calm. There was a moment of silence, then Jitter's voice, triumphant and terrified.
"Final connection made. Hit it!"
"Now!" Sid yelled into his comm, and Jitter slammed the final breaker into place on the Misfit's power board. The universe screamed. The sensation wasn't a sound, it was a vibration, a shriek of tortured metal and protesting physics that traveled through the rock, through the hull, into their bones. On the auxiliary bridge, the lights flickered, a chaotic strobe of stark Valkoran red and jury-rigged white. Alarms blared, 100 dead systems trying to wake at once. The power feed from the Misfit lasted 12 seconds. The lights on the hauler flared once, brilliantly, then died forever. For a terrifying half-second, the dreadnought's bridge went dark with it, plunging them into absolute blackness. And then, a deep, violent roar that shook the entire moon fragment. It was the sound of a fusion reactor catching, igniting, coming to life. It sounded less like a machine and more like an ancient beast waking from a 1,000-year slumber, and it was very, very angry. Red light flooded the bridge again, steady and strong. Consoles lit up. A deep, resonant hum replaced the silence.
"We have power!"
Nia cried out, her voice a mix of exhaustion and triumph.
"Main reactor is stable at 20%. Forward shields are online. Main spinal cannons are showing green."
Jitter slumped against the console, laughing breathlessly.
It worked! The crazy, stupid, beautiful plan actually worked!
They had propulsion, they had shields, they had the main guns of a Valkoran dreadnought. They had a Frankenstein's monster of a warship, a fusion of military order and human chaos. Standing on the bridge of the resurrected ghost ship, surrounded by his crew, Sid looked out at the star-dusted darkness. They needed a name. Not the Hand of Judgment. That ship had died with honor. This was something new. Something born of desperation and sheer stubborn nerve. The improbable cause, he said. You can't hide a dreadnought. So they embraced the chaos. They couldn't outrun Vikram's fleet, so they would outfight them. Jitter, giddy with the power at her disposal, wired the Misfit's dead transponder into the dreadnought's comms array. With a few keystrokes, she amplified its last signal, looping it, making it scream into the void. To anyone listening, it would sound like a heavily damaged but prize-rich freighter, ripe for the picking.
"Broadcasting on all Scraplord channels,"
Jitter announced, a wicked grin on her face.
"Come and get it, boys."
They were counting on one thing, Vikram's arrogance. He will come, Daiki said, his hands gripping the tactical station, a position he was born to occupy. His pride will demand it. They didn't have to wait long. Vikram's fleet arrived like sharks smelling blood. 4 ships, fast and hungry, rounding a massive asteroid. They were moving in for an easy kill. And then, the improbable cause moved. It emerged from the asteroid's shadow, its colossal frame blotting out the stars. It was a kilometer of dark metal and quiet menace. On the bridge of Vikram's command ship, there must have been a moment of pure, silent disbelief. That moment was all they got. Fire, Sid said.
"Firing!"
Jitter yelled, slamming her fist down on the weapons control she had hotwired.
"Whoops,"
she added a second later.
"That power surge wasn't exactly subtle. I think I just lit us up like a supernova for every deep-range sensor in this sector."
Good, Sid said. The dreadnought's spinal cannons, overcharged to a level that made every Valkoran safety protocol scream in agony, unleashed a physical wave of stellar fire. The lead pirate ship didn't even have time to raise its shields. It just evaporated. The Scraplord fleet was thrown into utter chaos. Their coordinated attack dissolved into a panicked scramble for survival. The battle was a barroom brawl in 0G. The improbable cause was a clumsy giant, but Vikram's smaller ships swarmed it, their plasma cannons scarring its ancient hull. On the bridge, it was controlled chaos.
"Shields buckling on starboard, rerouting auxiliary power from afterlife support,"
Nia would call out.
"Got it. Purging the plasma conduits. It's gonna get hot."
Jitter would yell back. Gunner stood guard at the bridge entrance, his rivet gun held at the ready, a silent promise of death. They were holding their own, but they were a skeleton crew. They couldn't win a war of attrition. We need to cut the head off the snake, Sid said. Daiki, get ready to party. Their plan was, in keeping with their recent theme, completely insane. They loaded into a cargo pod, to which Jitter had strapped the Misfits' old docking thrusters and nav computer. With a gut-wrenching lurch, they were fired. Sid wrestled with the makeshift controls, the pod bucking and sliding through the battlefield. It shot across the void and smashed through the hull of Vikram's command ship, tearing a hole through 3 decks before screeching to a halt in a darkened cargo bay. The fight to the bridge was a nightmare of cramped corridors and furious pirates. They reached a chasm, a section of the corridor that had been blown out, sparking power conduits hissing across a 20-meter gap. On the other side was a shield control terminal. There was no time to find another way around. Without a word, Gunnar braced his boots, grabbed a thick, trailing power conduit with one hand and Sid with the other. "Hold on," he grunted. With a Herculean heave, he swung Sid across the chasm like a human pendulum. Sid let go at the apex of the arc, his thrusters firing, and landed hard on the other side. He immediately started firing on the terminal. They blasted their way onto the bridge. Vikram was there, a hulking Valkoran even bigger than Daiki, his face a mask of snarling fury. He laughed, a venomous, guttural sound. "Look at you, Daiki, serving these fragile apes who think carrying the weak is a strength. It is a disease, a flaw in the design of the universe." He ignited a heavy plasma axe and charged. Daiki met his charge, his shock maul humming to life. The two Valkorans clashed, but Vikram, true to form, fought dirty. He feinted, kicked a loose floor plate into Daiki's path, and as Daiki stumbled, Vikram brought his axe around for a killing blow. The sound of Sid's magnetic harpoon gun cut through the din. The barbed metal tip, trailing a thin, high-tensile cable, slammed into Vikram's weapon arm. The force pinned his arm to the bulkhead behind him with a solid thud. His plasma axe sputtered and died. Disarmed and pinned like an insect, Vikram spat on the floor. "Finish me, warrior," he sneered at Daiki. "Uphold your pathetic honor." Daiki walked over to him. He looked at the pinned warlord, at the rage and cowardice in his eyes. Then he simply deactivated his shock maul. "You have no honor," Daiki said, his voice cold. "You are just salvage." He turned his back on him and, with Gunnar, finished off the last of the guards, leaving Vikram pinned and helpless for the Concordat to find. With Vikram's defeat broadcast across the pirate channel, Jitter made sure of that. His fleet broke, scattering like roaches into the dark. A sudden, profound silence fell over the battlefield. And into that silence, a new energy signature appeared. A small Concordat patrol fleet jumped into the system. The ships arrived guns ready, responding to the massive energy flare from the dreadnought's weapons. They stopped dead in space, their comms officer likely stammering as he stared at the legendary Valkoran dreadnought, scarred and sputtering, flying a makeshift human flag from a bent comms antenna, floating serenely above the fresh wreckage of a pirate fleet. Weeks later, at Concordat Starbase Epsilon, the crew of the Improbable Cause were reluctant celebrities. The story of the Voidwalkers was no longer a whisper, it was a headline. Sid, looking deeply uncomfortable in a borrowed Concordat officer's jacket, politely but firmly turned down a commission and a medal. The Concordat, in a rare moment of wisdom, decided not to press the issue of the stolen dreadnought and officially signed it over to him and his crew under the Galactic Salvage Act of '72. Later, they were back on the bridge of their monstrous, beautiful ship. The lights flickered less now. The reactor hummed a bit more smoothly. Jitter had even gotten the coffee maker working again, though she promised it wasn't weaponized. Yet. The family was assembled. Sid, Jitter, Gunnar, and their two newest additions, Daiki and Nia. Daiki, in a clean Valkoran uniform, looked every bit the officer, though he now stood on a bridge that ran on chaos and caffeine. Nia, her new prosthetic leg, a marvel of Jitter's artful junk sculpting, was already integrated into the ship's systems. Jitter pulled up a star chart. It showed another lawless, war-torn sector on the galactic fringe.
Got a report from one of my back-channel sources,
she said, her voice buzzing with excitement.
A colony transport, the Horizon's Promise, went down in the Tartarus Nebula. Concordat's already written it off, says it's too hazardous for a standard rescue op.
Sid looked at his crew. He saw Jitter, hungry for the next problem. He saw Gunnar, a quiet pillar of loyalty, knitting what looked like a tiny sweater. He saw Nia, the rescued, now an indispensable part of the team. And he saw Daiki, the proud warrior who had found a new, stranger honor among fragile, unbreakable humans. His found family of misfits, survivors, and ghosts. He leaned back in the captain's chair that still felt too big for him and grinned, the first genuine smile he's had in ages. "Well," he said, the word hanging in the quiet hum of the bridge. "Sounds like some folks might need a lift." For a moment, the old silence of a professional crew assessing a job settled over them. But this was a different crew, and a different kind of silence. It was broken by Daiki, who stepped up to the holographic map, his posture no longer that of a disgraced soldier, but of a grand strategist finally given a worthy puzzle. "The Tartarus Nebula is a graveyard of gravitational shears," he stated, his voice a low rumble of analysis, not protest. "Standard Concordat approach vectors would be suicide. A direct, high-velocity insertion through the core, however." He tapped the screen, highlighting a trajectory so insane it would have made him court-martial his own junior officers a month ago. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips. "Is merely improbable." Nia, leaning forward in her station, her fingers already dancing across the console, didn't even flinch. The terrified engineer who once quoted safety regulations was gone, replaced by a woman forged in the fires of human chaos.
"We could use the main deflector dish to project a localized stability field. It would drain half the reactor and the feedback might melt the primary conduits, but it would punch a stable tunnel right through the worst of it."
Her eyes shone with a manic light that looked suspiciously like Jitter's.
"Melt the conduits?"
Jitter cackled, spinning in her chair.
"Nia, my brilliant theory angel, we're not going to melt them, we're going to braid them. We'll turn that feedback into a wideband active sonar pulse. We'll hear every rock and wreck in that nebula singing to us in 4-part harmony."
As the two engineers began a rapid-fire exchange of theoretical physics and joyful technobabble, Gunnar moved with his usual quiet poise. He walked over to the captain's chair where Sid's old, scarred EVA helmet sat on a spare console. He picked it up and, with a surprising gentleness, wiped a smudge of grime from its faceplate with his thumb. He set it back down, then gave Sid a single, solid nod. It was a promise. "I'm with you. We're with you." Sid watched them. He saw Daiki, the warrior of Iron Dogma, now happily planning a suicide run based on a gut feeling. He saw Nia, the rescued, now gleefully designing the very kind of barbaric system that had saved her. He saw Jitter, a mad genius who had finally found a canvas big enough for her brand of beautiful madness. And he saw Gunnar, the silent mountain, his loyalty and unshakable physical force. His family, forged in wreckage, bound by the knowledge that they were all a little broken. He leaned back in the captain's chair, the worn material feeling more like home than any place he'd ever known. The galaxy looked at humanity and saw soft flesh, breakable bones, and chaotic emotions. They saw a species that had to strap themselves into metal boxes to survive the void, a fatal flaw in a universe of hard shells and integrated systems. They were wrong. It wasn't a flaw. It was the entire point. They said humans were too fragile for this galaxy, Sid said, his voice quiet but echoing with a final, unshakable certainty across the bridge of his ship. And they were right. We break, we scar, we hurt. Our strength isn't in being unbreakable. He looked at the faces of his crew, his family of misfits and survivors, and a real, deep smile spread across his face. It's in knowing that when everything falls apart, you don't need the thing that can't be broken. You need the ones who know how to pick up the pieces, strap them onto their own backs, and carry them out of the dark. You need the fragile ones.